These things in Matthew and Luke were written somewhere probably around AD 31, 32, and Jesus referred to these cities, the wickedness of these cities. About AD 65, we find that Peter refers to Sodom and Gomorrah in his warning signs in 2 Peter chapter 2. He talks about the angels that sinned and fell. He talks about the flood that in the days of Noah as a warning sign about the wickedness and sin that God makes a change. And the third one he talked about was Sodom being destroyed, and yet Lot being righteous, being delivered. And you know what's interesting about 2 Peter chapter 2, there's a fourth one you could add in this, even though Peter did not add it in his list, and that is the destruction and final destruction of Jerusalem and the temple as a type of judgment. All of this is a type of judgment to come upon a wicked world. That's what all this depicts. It's a shadow of what's to come. You say, well, wonder why Peter didn't write that. Well, the temple wasn't destroyed until about AD 70. What Peter wrote was about AD 65, and shortly thereafter he was crucified upside down, so historians tell us. So Peter did not live to see the temple destroyed. Neither did any of the other apostles except John. And so we find that those men's lives were going to be taken after about a 30 to 40 year period of preaching the gospel. So that kind of sets it in motion. So it is also used in Revelation, for example, chapter 11, verse 8, written about somewhere around AD 96. So, and you can go on. By no means is that exhaustive. You know, Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 2 had this to say. And these are the words of Jeremiah in the days of Josiah, the king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. Okay? So this is around 629 BC. And I want you to notice what Jeremiah has to say beginning at verse 9. And I'm going to jump on over into Jeremiah 23, then we'll jump to Genesis chapter 19, verse 12. Wherefore I will yet plead with you, saith the Lord, with your children's children will I plead. Hath a nation, verse 11, changed their gods, which are yet no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit. Now, when you think about the words that's penned there, and you think about the annals of history of mankind, and it's real easy to apply it today, and it could, just think about what this is leading to. Because of what Israel had done and the apostasy they had went on in, they had changed the holy God into that which was not God. Sounds like Romans chapter 1, doesn't it? Romans chapter 1. Be astonished, O ye heavens, and at this be horribly afraid. Be ye very desolate, saith the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of the living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. Two evils they had committed. What was one of the evils? They had forsaken me, the fountain of living water. So what had happened here? They had forsaken God. So how did they get in this state? They forsook God. How did they get in the state before the flood? They forsook God. How did they, Sodom and Gomorrah, get in the state they were in, and those cities in the well-watered plains of Jordan? Well, they forsook God. They have forsaken the living God. Now, you can make application of this throughout different points of history, but primarily this is written to God's people, the children of Israel in Judah. And so we find, as we look at this, the second thing they had done, they had hewn them out cisterns or water holders that can hold no water. You know what he's saying here? You got a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it. And I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but being on a farm and all, a lot of times you'd have to grab a bucket with some water, and maybe it's to fill up the chicken feeders, or maybe go to the hog pen, or whatever. You have a trough, you're watering some animals, maybe some goats or something, and sometimes you'll just grab a bucket and pick it up, and you go to the faucet and go to put water in it and go to pick it up. Well, the bucket looked good on the outside, but the bottom got holes in it. That's what they've done, false security. They had created themselves false security. And so we find as we come on over, and as we said, as we come on over into this, we find that Jeremiah is writing these words about what had been seen in God's people. Also, he's talking about here the sins that were going on in Sodom. See, we get off on a tangent sometimes and think that sodomy, or unnatural thing, was the only thing going on. That was one of many. That was probably the top of the heap, okay, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, if you look at biblical history. But that's not all that was going on. Notice what he says here in Jeremiah 23:14. I have seen also in the prophets of Jerusalem a horrible thing. They commit adultery, they walk in lies, they strengthen the hand of evildoer, they don't return from his wickedness. They are all unto me as Sodom, the inhabitants thereof has Gomorrah. And as Reed brought out in one of the lessons, really you could sum all this up. They were caught up in their own pride, wasn't they? Caught up in their own pride. And so we find this is the state that we're looking at, and given a time frame on Genesis chapter 19 and what is going on there. I'm going to kind of turn over here. And we find that, as we've already talked about it, and we should be around verse 12, the two angels that came to Sodom, we know that they lodged with Lot. We talked about that in great detail. We know that men of Sodom came and surrounded Lot's house and wanted to break in and get to know those men, and the angel struck them blind. And so we find that Lot was pulled back inside unto safety. He had offered him his 2 daughters, and we talked about all those different things that Lot did. And I don't know that we mentioned about this being the trial of Lot. That did come into play, about this being the test of Lot's faith, about these angels coming, about him lodging, about him protecting them. God said he was going to go down and see what this crowd was about. Was this a test of Lot's faith? And you begin to maybe see some of that in that event involving his daughters. You say, how so? Lot, being a righteous man, recognized that these men were different, and that these people were not that these people were up to no good. They were not going to be very hospitable, if you will. And so we find Lot offered his 2 daughters. He was going to sacrifice his 2 daughters to protect these men. Now, where have we heard that before? In a few years, we're going to find somebody else that's going to offer their son as a sacrifice. What does that show? There was still some faith in Lot, wasn't there? There was still some righteousness left in Lot, wasn't there? Just like Abraham. Abraham had got to the point where he was willing to sacrifice. Lot knew that these men were different. He knew that they were worthy of protection. And so now we come down, and these men tell Lot that in verse 12, hast thou any besides those that were in his household, which was his 2 daughters, his wife, and him? That's all we read of. Hast thou any besides son-in-laws, and thy sons, and thy daughters, or whatsoever thou hast in this city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-laws, and we talked about that, because all we read about in Lot's family is Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters. So this was more of a patrol type setting that the King James Version has put into this thought pattern here, this narrative of Moses. Because if you notice here, the 2 daughters were in one place, he had to go talk to the son-in-laws in another place, as it refers to. And so we find that as we look at this, Lot went out and spake unto his son-in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, so they were separated here. Okay? And you can go back and study that, and I think we talked about that last week. Anyway, and Lot went out and spake unto his son-in-laws, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his son-in-laws. He seems the ones that mock. Get up and get out of this place. Now, you know, we talked about the compromises that must have went on in Lot's life as he began to dwell in this city of wickedness, and how the society that day was no doubt impacting his life, because Peter did say in 2 Peter chapter 2 that his soul, his righteous soul, was vexed daily by their words and actions. And yet he sits in the city gate. So when you look at this and him going to his son-in-laws and saying, hey, you need to get out of here, God's going to destroy this place, they thought of him as one that mocked. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, Lot. That's not going to happen, Lot. Now, Lot, go on. Where have we heard that before? What about in Acts chapter 26 and verse 24? When the Apostle Paul is before King Agrippa, Festus is there, and we know that prior to he had like to scared Festus to death, preaching to him of righteousness and temperance and judgment to come in Acts chapter 24. But I want you to notice how Festus referred to the Apostle Paul as he recounts his conversion. Notice what he says here in the 24th verse. I'm going to begin in verse 23. That Christ should suffer, and that he should be the first that should rise from the dead and show light unto the people and the Gentiles. So he's talking about it glorifying God. He's talking about his conversion. He's talking about what Jesus Christ had done. And notice Festus' comment. And as he thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself, much learning doth make thee mad. So Festus mocked him, didn't he? You didn't believe that. Now, you would think, if you look at the setting here, and what all has gone on in Jerusalem at this time, and what had went on a few years earlier, the miracles that Jesus did, his death and resurrection, and the preaching of the gospel was not done in the closet. And yet these people have a hard time believing them. You're going to see this in Lot's daughters, and in Lot somewhat. You would think after the events of Sodom had taken place and Gomorrah being destroyed, and you had seen this, you might catch on that, you know, it may be time to tighten this thing up a little bit, you know? But that's not the case, is it? Isn't it any wonder that we're more blessed than they were, Jesus said, in that we haven't seen, but yet we believe? We haven't seen, but we believe. You know, it's kind of like what we find in Luke chapter 16. Just thought about that. About this seeing and believing. And, you know, here we have two people. And Jesus here, what he does here in this, he's allowing one to speak from the dead. A lot of times, you know, people make the comment, and I've had this comment made to me. If someone would come back and just tell me, then I would know. Well, you got that. You got someone that came back. Luke chapter 16. This man came back. He was allowed to speak from beyond the grave. And notice what he said here. The first thing, he was concerned about himself when he woke up in that torment. He wanted just a drop of water, didn't he? Well, he saw that his case was hopeless. Then he wanted to become a soul winner, didn't he? He said, listen, I got 5 brethren. Go tell them. Go tell them. So they won't come to this place of torment. And Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And you know, this is our way of saying today with the New Testament, we got the examples, we got the prophets, we got the testimony, we got the actions. They had it too in the old. And notice what he says here. Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went from them from the dead, they will repent. Send someone back from the dead. That'll change them. Let them see someone come back. Well, you've come back, rich man, through Jesus. He's allowing you to speak to those that are alive. We got the example. And notice what Jesus said to him. And he said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, if they hear not the word of God, if they hear not the Bible, if they hear not the New Testament, if they will not hear, in our case today, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, if they won't hear that, neither will they be persuaded though one rose from the dead. You know, a man will see things and still don't believe it, won't he? He'll see it and still won't believe it. We are very unique in that, aren't we? It takes a lot of preaching, as the Apostle Paul said, to convince people, doesn't it? It takes a lot of convincing. And yet we find that you've got these examples and we still need convincing. That kind of got off on a tangent. Let me get back to where I'm supposed to be. Anyway, they mocked. And so in verse 15, when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And so we find that these angels now come to Lot, they come to Lot's wife, and they come to his 2 daughters. I want you to notice something kind of significant about these 2 angels and what's going to happen here. There was 2 angels, and they had how many hands? 4 hands. How many people were in Lot's household that took the hands of these angels? God knew, didn't he?
4, ain't it?
4, yeah.
Yeah.
4.
Lot and his wife and
2 daughters. There was no other angels.
Pardon?
There was no other angels. I mean, there was no more mercy. It was those 4. So anyway, and we'll get there in just a minute. And when the morning arose, the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take thy wife, thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of this city. So, you know, a great warning had gone out. You know, kind of like these angels were involved in a form of evangelism, as we would call it today. You say, how so? They went after Lot, going to him in his house. That's what evangelists do today. They go from house to house teaching, don't they? This is what was going on with Lot. He was being taught. What do the evangelists do? Well, they warn people of the impending consequences of sin. This is what they were doing here also in this setting. They warned him of what was going to happen in plain words. In the words of Jesus, you know, it was real plain, wasn't it? Luke 13:3. And it's real simple. Repent or perish. Now, how many words is that? Is that hard to understand? Repent or perish. That was the message the angels had. You
mentioned, before you get too far ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of rolling fast. Go ahead.
Fine, but I was looking at 2 Peter 2 a while ago, right before you mentioned it. And it's amazing to me when you look at the King James Version, which you read out of, and what the English Standard Version, how they kind of lay it out there a little different.
Yeah.
I want to read that. But
Go ahead, yeah.
it says, I'll start verse 7, it says, and if he rescued Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard.
Yeah.
He's right in the middle of it, and he had to have somebody come get him.
Yeah. He was affected by it. Yeah. And it makes you wonder about, here it gets back to the first part of this when we talked about Lot being in the city in the first place. Okay?
He chose it.
He chose it, that's right. And so do you see his son-in-law's mocking, maybe from the standpoint that Lot had lost some of his influence? Because that stuff does have an impact on him.
Well, they didn't respect him.
Huh?
They didn't respect him.
No, right,
No respect
exactly. So anyway, that's a good point. Good point, Eric, thank you. And so we find that the third part of this, they urge Lot to flee the impending destruction. Is that not what evangelists do today? So were not these angels playing the part of an evangelist? They were laying out the warning, they went, they warned, they did it in simple words, and they urged. So what's the message today? We urge people to repent and obey the gospel. Because the day is coming. It's the same message, isn't it? You can see how Sodom and Gomorrah and those other two cities, and maybe we'll get to them. I hadn't mentioned them yet, but we'll get to them. Moses talked about them, the other two. But anyway, the message is the same. Repent or perish, isn't it? Like you get out, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. And so we find that in verse 16, this one's fascinating here. Eric kind of touched on the edge of it a little bit. This was fascinating. This verse 16. Now all this is going on, right? No doubt he knows who these men are because he's seen their power. He's seen them snatch him back in, blind these men, and all those things, right? Okay. If you didn't know before, you're well aware now, okay? But you better be paying attention to who these men are, okay? These angels. But here we go. Human nature. And while he procrastinated. King James Version says, while he lingered. Knowing this is going to happen. Knowing it's coming. You know, and it's kind of like our mindset and hearts today as humans in general, isn't it? There's two things that we know are going to happen in our life, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Going to happen no matter what. One, we're going to die. Right? We know that. But that's the least thing we make preparation for. That's the last thing we make preparation for, if we ever make any preparation for it. And those that believe the Bible, the judgment. That's going to happen. There's too much evidence. There's too much evidence that dictates that this is going to happen. So, knowing these things, Brother Con, I think Peter said, knowing these things, what manner of person ought ye be? So, we're not left in the dark. But what do? I'm talking about humanity in general. I mean, not us personally, but I'm just looking at it in general. What do we do with a lot of things that we can't quite get the gist of it being urgent? We procrastinate. We linger, don't we? We linger. You know, when did Lot linger? I don't know. It doesn't really say, does it? It doesn't go there. But we know he's in this wicked city. We know he's in a home. We know he's got associations there. What was the lingering part about it? Well, it doesn't tell us. And maybe because it doesn't tell us is, what causes us to procrastinate? What causes us to linger? You know? I'm sure it may be different for me, to you, to somebody else, or whatever, but it's there, isn't it? That thing to want to linger, to procrastinate. And yet we find that God knew, because Lot has already demonstrated that righteousness still existed as a fire or a spark. Here it reads like a fire from the English Standard Version, doesn't it? In his heart. Now, he may not have exhibited it all the time outwardly, but it was there. He's demonstrated that to God. God's going to spare it. And so we find that while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, upon the hand of his wife, upon the hand of his 2 daughters. So these angels took them by the hand, and the way we would say it today, drug them out of the city. Literally. Kind of like what we'd say today, Brother Con, sometimes you had to put a rope on their feet and drag them with a tractor, don't you? And they go screaming, no, 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 no. That was the disposition that's going on here. And these things are written now, and before we get too far out of perspective here, these things are written for our learning. These are examples. And when you look at them, they're really denoting human life, aren't they? It's teaching us about ourselves. It's teaching us about our neighbor. It's teaching us about each other, isn't it? And what it takes sometimes to rescue us out of a dangerous situation. Sometimes we just have to be drugged, don't we? To be drugged out. This is what's going on with Lot here. So Anyway, notice what it says here, and we talked about the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city. They took him out. They got him out of danger. But that thing of procrastination and whatever was there was still in the heart and mind of Lot. And it came to pass when they had brought them forth aboard, and he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all these plains, escape to the mountains, lest thou be consumed. I don't know about you, if two angels had to grab me and drug me out of somewhere, they told me to go to the mountain, you ain't got to tell me but once. Guess where I'm going? I'm going to the mountain. Now, if they had said, you need to go to the mountain and jump off the cliff into the sea, guess where I'm going? Into the water. But that's not the case, is it? Well, it's a lot of times, is it? Notice Lot. I can't do that. I can't go to the mountain. And Lot said unto him, Oh, not so, my Lord. I can't go to the mountain. I'm not that kind of... Well, Lot's life consisted of, prior to being in Sodom, he was a herdsman. Guess what he was used to? The wilderness, wasn't he? So really, whatever's holding Lot's thoughts is still there, because he says that if I escape to the mountain, lest some evil overtake me and I die. Well, wait a minute. You're a herdsman. That's like a farmer saying, hey, I can't go plant my crop because I don't have any seed. Well, wait a minute, you're a farmer. Why ain't you got no seed? I can't go plant my farm because the gate's closed. Well, who's going to open the gate? And so we find that thing is still within Lot's mind or within his heart. He's still uncertain about what's going on here in his life. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy. So he acknowledges that God has been merciful unto him. You know? He acknowledges the fact that God has been magnified, his mercy upon him has showed unto me in saving my life. He acknowledges that. He seems to have it in word. Now, a lot of times we have things in word, but we don't have it in deed. We're not fully convinced. The truck hit us on the interstate and we were told not to get in it, and we did, but we ain't convinced we did, and we arguing with the mortician that we got to go home. That sounds crazy, don't it? Daniel?
It's very odd that he says that, because he's literally being saved from evil and from dying
literally.
at the very moment.
Mm-hmm.
So why would he be worried about going to the mountains to die?
Exactly.
It makes no sense for God to do that.
It doesn't. And see, and that's the whole thing. And him being a herdsman, he's used to protecting the sheep and the cattle from what? Bands of robbers, lions, bears. I mean, you know, what's going on a lot with your mind? Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it's a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing, and I will not overthrow this city, for thou hast spoken it. So, God still being merciful and patient with Lot. Is he not merciful and patient with us today? Even though sometimes we still got our own mind and our own way and our own heart set. But God is merciful. He's allowing Lot to go to this. Notice how he says it. It's just a little city. That's kind of like what we say sometimes. Well, it's just a little sin. But it was in the city that God was going to destroy. God's showing his mercy to Lot too, but he's also showing his mercy to Zoar, isn't he? Because it was in them plains. It was on the list. It was going to be hit. They don't have as much sin lower down there because there's not as many people. It's a little city. It won't be so bad down there in that city. Who's to say it wasn't worse? Science got nothing to do with it. And so we find that as we look on here, and he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing, and I will not overthrow the city. That's God. And so God says, Haste thee, escape thither. For I cannot do anything till thou come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. So God said, you need to get to that city. I'm honoring my word. I'm not going to destroy this city till the righteous are clear. So right now we've got 4, right? That's God honoring his word. Okay? He wasn't going to destroy it until they got clear. And so God is sure on his promises. And so we find the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then, notice what happened in verse 24. That's where we're probably going to stop because it's time for me to quit. Notice what it says here. The sun was risen upon the earth. Lot has entered into Zoar. And look what happens. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom, upon Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plains and all the inhabitants of those cities that which grew up upon the ground. God said he was going to destroy fire and brimstone, a type of sulfur fire. And they tell me, and I'm not a fireman, Reed is, and I don't know that much about it. They tell me a sulfur fire is a bad deal to deal with. Now, I don't know, just what I've been told. The way it burns, the odor, the gases it puts on. And notice this, nobody else survived, only 4. Sounds like only 8 in the ark, don't it? It says he overthrew all of them, the inhabitants, all the inhabitants of these cities. Everybody. Gone. And of course we know the Dead Sea covers this area now that it's talking about here, and it's good for nothing. And so God kept his promise on that destruction. Then we find very tragically though in the end, well on the way out, well on the way to safety, but Lot's wife looked back. Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. You need to get out of Jerusalem while you can. Don't look back. Don't go down in the house and get your stuff. When you see the armies starting to encompass Jerusalem, and that went on for years. It didn't just happen overnight. They saw it coming. If you go back and look at the prior historical events that took place there as the Roman army was marching down there into Palestine and all, they were conquering cities as they were going along the way. So it didn't happen overnight. They had ample warning. It's coming, you get out. And you better especially get out when you see the Roman army on the horizon. Don't be like Lot's wife. And he talks about the stuff in the house. Now, whether that was why she looked back, it doesn't say. There was something about that city, wasn't it? There was something that went on there. God said, don't you look back. You know, God tells us today when we obey the gospel not to do what? What did the children of Israel steadily do once they got out of the Egyptian bondage? We want to go back to Egypt. You let us out here down, Moses. You done this to us. We were better off in the slime pits and being on the whips of Egypt than we're all out here free men and women. You really what makes that? Don't know when we're well off. Anyway, we'll stop right there and we'll pick back up at verse 24 next week.